Zambia's electoral bomb, why Hichilema is desperate to redraw Zambia's map before 2026. Today, we dive into one of the most explosive claims in Zambia's political landscape. Why is President Hakainde Hichilema pushing so aggressively to create new constituencies? According to political analyst Dr. Sishuwa Sishuwa, this isn't just a governance reform, it's a strategic, calculated move with massive implications for 2026. Is delimitation a necessary update to Zambia's democracy, or a silent weapon designed to tilt the electoral battlefield? Stay with me as we unpack the political chess game happening right under the nation's nose. Good day, viewers. Welcome to another edition of the InspirAfrica Official. I'm Nakash. It's been quite an eventful week here in Southern Africa, hasn't it? The political winds are blowing strong across our beloved continent, and today, we have a story that absolutely demands your attention. Our lead story today concerns a constitutional crisis unfolding in Zambia, one that threatens to shake the very foundations of the nation's democracy. Picture, if you will, a president who once rode the crest of popular hope and democratic promise. A leader who swept into power in 2021 on the wings of change, defeating an incumbent in what many celebrated as a triumph of the people's will. Now imagine that same president, just months before the next election, desperately attempting to redraw the electoral map of his entire nation. Imagine him pushing through constitutional changes in the dead of night, refusing to release the data that would justify his actions, stonewalling civil society, and appointing loyalists to oversee the very process meant to ensure fairness. Why would a president who claims democratic credentials behave this way? What is he so afraid of? What does he know about his own electoral prospects that the public doesn't? Is this the desperate gambit of a leader who sees defeat looming on the horizon? Are we witnessing the slow-motion dismantling of Zambian democracy, one constitutional amendment at a time? And here's the most chilling question of all: if President Hakainde Hichilema succeeds in ramming through these changes, will the 2026 election even be free and fair? Or will it be nothing more than a carefully choreographed performance, the outcome predetermined by redrawn boundaries, stacked institutions, and constitutional manipulations? What happens when a democracy dies not with a bang, but with a series of legislative maneuvers disguised as reform? Factual foundation. The revelation came to light in March 2025, when President Hichilema and his Minister of Justice suddenly announced plans to amend Zambia's constitution ahead of the August 2026 general election. The timing immediately raised eyebrows, less than 18 months before voters were scheduled to go to the polls. By May 2025, the government had tabled the Constitution of Zambia, Amendment, Bill No. 7 of 2025 in Parliament. The bill proposed sweeping changes, increasing the number of parliamentary seats from 156 to 211, a staggering addition of 55 new constituencies. It introduced a mixed-member proportional representation system for reserved seats, removed term limits for local government leaders, and revised electoral procedures, including a provision that no by-elections would be held within 180 days of a general election. The government claimed these changes were necessary to address population growth and ensure fair representation based on a delimitation report prepared by the Electoral Commission of Zambia. But there was one glaring problem: the government refused to release the actual delimitation report. Citizens, opposition parties, and civil society organizations demanded to see the data, the population figures, the methodology, the geographic distribution of the proposed new constituencies. Without this information, how could anyone verify that the boundaries were being drawn fairly? The secrecy fueled suspicion. Critics began to suspect gerrymandering, that the 55 new seats were being strategically placed in Hichilema's strongholds of southern, western, and northwestern provinces, while opposition areas would be carved up to dilute their voting power. As Bill 7 moved toward its first reading in Parliament in June 2025, opposition mounted. The Zambia Conference of Catholic Bishops spoke out. The Law Association of Zambia raised constitutional concerns. Civil society coalitions issued joint statements. Even some within Hichilema's own United Party for National Development privately expressed unease. On June 24, 2025, under mounting pressure, President Hichilema met with civil society representatives at State House. 2 days later, on June 26, Parliament voted to defer the bill, with Hichilema claiming he wanted broader consultation. But the very next day, June 27, 2025, the Constitutional Court dropped a bombshell. In the case of Munir Zulu and Celestine Mukandila versus Attorney General, the court ruled that the entire Bill 7 process was unconstitutional. The government, the court declared, had violated multiple constitutional provisions by attempting to amend the supreme law without wide public consultation. The court emphasized that the constitution belongs to the people of Zambia, not to politicians, and that any amendments must be people-driven, not executive-driven. The judgment declared Bill 7 a legal nullity, dead on arrival. Direct evidence. The political analyst Sishuwa Sishuwa, writing in the Zambian Observer, laid bare what he saw as the president's true motivations. In an article titled "The Devil in Delimitation," Sishuwa argued that Hichilema's desperation stemmed from three core objectives. He wrote, "The first is to prevent the adoption-related weakening or even implosion of the ruling United Party for National Development ahead of the 2026 general election." According to Sishuwa, incumbent UPND MPs in the party's strongholds face fierce competition for re-adoption, and Hichilema's solution was simple: create more seats so that both current and aspiring MPs could be accommodated without bloodshed. But Sishuwa didn't stop there. The second reason behind Hichilema's desperation to create new constituencies is to give his party a clear majority in parliament after the 2026 election, he wrote. The concern, apparently, was that Hichilema might win the presidency where rigging is easier but lose control of the National Assembly, where fraud is harder to conceal. And then came the most damning allegation: his plan is to use the impending constitutional changes to avert intra-party divisions, secure a two-thirds majority in parliament in next year's general election, and, in the aftermath, move to make further changes to the constitution of Zambia, among which is to remove presidential term limits. Civil society leader Given Mutinta echoed these concerns in another article. Mutinta demanded transparency. The government must release the delimitation report showing exactly how the 55 new seats were distributed. Without the delimitation report, how can citizens verify that the demographic metric is being applied uniformly or that delimitation favors constituencies with high population densities to promote equity rather than merely reinforcing President Hichilema's political dominance? Mutinta asked. The failure to release the report, Mutinta suggested, pointed to something sinister. Based on the reluctance to publish the report, it is plausible that the data indicates that regions already regarded as strongholds of the ruling party are not the most densely populated but are nonetheless targeted for delimitation, raising concerns of potential political gerrymandering. When the Constitutional Court finally ruled, lawyer Celestine Mukandila, one of the petitioners who challenged Bill 7, addressed journalists in Lusaka. His relief was palpable. "Countrymen and women," he said, "the judgment we have today speaks to the fight and the zeal that we have to ensure that democracy is protected. This judgment speaks to the fact that we are here to protect the Constitution of the Republic of Zambia." He continued, "We indicated that the Constitution should contain what the people want. We indicated that if anyone feels there are lacunas in the Constitution, they must take those provisions to the Constitutional Court for interpretation. But, alas, our colleagues did not listen." Mukandila emphasized the court's reasoning. "The Constitutional Court has ruled with us and in favor of our petition, indicating that the process that this government undertook was not the correct one because it was not inclusive. My grandfather was not consulted in the village, in Bwingwa, the chief there was not consulted. Now what we need to do is to come up with a constitution that will speak to the aspirations of the Zambian people." But perhaps the most revealing moment came later, when President Hichilema himself continued to refer to Bill 7 as merely deferred, not dead. Despite the Constitutional Court's clear ruling, Hichilema told UN officials in a local government association conference that the bill has not been discontinued but only deferred. The Law Association of Zambia was forced to write to the Attorney General, expressing alarm that the president's language undermined the court's authority and suggested he might try to resurrect the invalidated legislation. Deeper analysis. What makes this story so troubling is not just Bill 7 itself, but the broader pattern of behavior it represents. Critics argue that Hichilema's government has been systematically dismantling democratic safeguards ahead of the 2026 election. Consider the Electoral Commission of Zambia. Previous Zambian presidents, despite their flaws, maintained ethnic and regional diversity in the commission's leadership. But Hichilema replaced commissioners in a way that now leaves 4 of the 5 positions filled by individuals from his own region, southern, western, and northwestern provinces. The 5th seat remains vacant. In an increasingly ethnically polarized country, this composition has eroded public trust in the body meant to guarantee electoral fairness. Then there's the judiciary. Multiple opposition MPs and independent candidates have been arrested on what many see as politically motivated charges. Magistrates who convict them are rewarded with transfers to Lusaka and promotions to the High Court. If convicted politicians fail to overturn their sentences before nomination day in 2026, the Constitution bars them from running. They would be serving a sentence of imprisonment, even if on appeal. The courts then conveniently delay hearing appeals until after the election. And what of the main opposition Patriotic Front? The government has effectively taken control of it through the Registrar of Societies, backing a rival faction led by Miles Sampa, who has pledged to support Hichilema in 2026. Meanwhile, the legitimate PF leadership remains tied up in endless court battles before Hichilema-friendly judges. There's also the matter of parliamentary by-elections. In constituencies where opposition or independent MPs have been arrested and convicted, the government has won a remarkable string of victories in the resulting by-elections overseen by the very Electoral Commission whose independence is now in question. Constitutional lawyer O'Brien Kaba, writing for ConstitutionNet, observed that the controversy over Bill 7 reflects deeper structural problems. The current reform process, he noted, has a narrow focus on electoral provisions that conveniently benefit the ruling party rather than addressing broader constitutional power issues and institutional weaknesses. The Law Association of Zambia was blunt in its assessment. After the Constitutional Court ruling, LAZ declared Bill 7 null and void and called for all constitutional reform efforts to be postponed until after the 2026 election. Any future amendments, LAZ insisted, must be led by an independent, non-partisan committee of experts through a genuinely participatory process. But will the government listen? The establishment of a 25-member technical committee in October 2025 to revive constitutional reforms, despite the court ruling, suggests otherwise. The committee's legitimacy and mandate remain contested, and many fear it's simply another attempt to smuggle Bill 7 back through a different door. The question that haunts Zambia today is this: are we watching a democracy die slowly? As political scientists Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt wrote in their book How Democracies Die, sometimes, democracy dies with a bang. But more often, democracies die slowly. Hichilema came to power promising to uphold democratic norms that previous President Edgar Lungu had weakened. Instead, critics argue, he has weaponized those same institutions, the courts, the police, the Electoral Commission, to consolidate power in ways that may prove even more dangerous. Thank you so much for watching today's edition of InspirAfrica Official. This story out of Zambia is one we'll continue to follow closely in the coming months as the country moves toward the August 2026 election. I want to hear from you. What do you think about what's happening in Zambia? Is President Hichilema's attempt to redraw the electoral map a legitimate response to population growth, or is it something more sinister? Should constitutional changes ever be made so close to an election? And what does this mean for democracy across Africa? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have a real conversation about what's at stake here, not just for Zambia, but for all of us who believe in democratic governance on this continent. We'll be back tomorrow with another important story, so make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on. You don't want to miss what we have coming up. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and remember, democracy only survives when citizens remain vigilant. This is Nakash, signing off from InspirAfrica Official. See you tomorrow.